So, as I said, my name is Emily. I'm a designer. I first met Code for America back in 2012 when I was a fellow for the city of Austin. I've been loosely involved in government public services and designing services since then, and I've been in Asheville for about a year, so super excited to be here still every day. And what I'm going to talk about is how to think about the people who are going to use the thing that you're working on. Or if you're the people who are using the thing, how to express that to the people who are building it, right? It's a two-way situation. So just to get started, who here has used something that just didn't do what you expected it to do? Like this door, for example. Somebody had to write pull on this door because it looks like you would push it in. Who here has found something to be overly complicated or confusing for the situation that you were in? This sign is really close by. Have you seen it? There are literally two options, yet there are like 9 arrows here. You can go right or you can go straight, and there are 9 arrows. And somehow I managed to also take a picture while driving by, so let's not talk about that. Actually, I don't think I was driving. I think someone else was driving. So third thing, have you ever encountered something that felt like it was not designed with your goals in mind, right? Here is a path. That, I don't know if you can see it. So there's sidewalks that go like this, and there's a path where people walk to go through the park rather than, I don't know where the sidewalks are taking you, but it's not where you're going. People walk the way they walk. So software and designing and technology is often very similar. This is not a real UI. It says too many choices, but it's a good example of something you might encounter where there's just a gazillion choices. It doesn't really give any indication that it understands the context that you're in. Like you might be needing to do something quickly, like on the highway, but in the computer world of things. It doesn't really give you an indication of how it's going to work when you do a specific thing. It also doesn't really give any idea that it understands your intent. But unlike the park we just looked at, you could have hundreds of people who are trying to make shortcuts to do what they actually want to do, and you'd have no indication of that because you built it, you put it out there, and then you never see who uses it. Is everybody with me? Also, if you have questions, shout them out. I'm all good with being interrupted if I know y'all are following. So the way that I like to approach design, and a lot of people I've worked with, is that we can do better if we design with our users and not for them. So say I want to design something, or say I want to pull certain data out so that you have access to it, or so that someone else has access to it, rather than going off by myself in a room and imagining this perfect world where I do all these things and then I just hand it over to you and say, here, use it. You probably would be really confused at what I handed you because I just made a bunch of assumptions about what context you were in when you wanted to use it, what you were doing, all of these things. And if we work together to get to that product, it's usually a lot better. So the way that process tends to work is often called user-centered design or human-centered design. There's a lot of different terms out there, so don't get too stuck on any of them. I would define it as an empathetic approach to solving community problems where the needs of the end user guide the process. So whatever you're trying to do is my goal as a designer or as a developer or as an engineer to help you do that. So step 1, understand your user and what context they're working in. Sketch out a solution. So that could be on a napkin, on a whiteboard. It could be a full UI that you've designed on a computer. It could just be a statement that you want to test. And put it in front of someone and tell them to do the thing you think they want to do. And see what they say, see how they use it, see what they do with it, basically. And then just keep going. Make that thing, go back and test, and then keep changing. So I'm going to talk a little more and then show you a picture of what this might look like. So if we're talking about data for the city of Austin, let's start with a problem that someone might want to solve, or a question. Say someone in Asheville wants to know if crime has risen on her street in the last 10 years. You could sketch out that solution on paper of how she might find in a UI, like what the crime has been in her neighborhood, and then show it to her and say, where would you click if you wanted to find out the thing you're trying to find out in the last 10 years? And then what would you expect to see next? It looks kind of like this. It's really not very high tech, and your drawings do not have to be very pretty. A lot of times people are just, it's easy for someone to tell you what they want to find out and why, so you're really just there to listen. And she might say really interesting things that you had never expected. You just thought she wanted like all the data from the last 10 years, but she might say, where's the zoom button? I can't find my street. And then you're like, oh, well, she's never going to find the data if she can't zoom into the map, right? I need to make a bigger zoom button. She might also say, I'm actually only interested in any data that's going to give me a sense of like the racial disparity that's happening here. Or she might say, how many burglaries have there been? Is it okay for me to leave my bike on the front porch? So all of these things would be interesting and would lead you down a slightly different path that might actually be more accessible to the people you're designing for. The other thing that I thought before I started doing this work was that you would need to talk to 1 million people before you had any sort of good data about how to design the right thing. I find that after 2 people or 3 people, I start to hear the same thing again and again. So usually less than 5 is fine, and you have way more information than if you talk to no one, which is kind of the other way. So let's go through a few examples. And they're a little bit all over the place because I didn't want to focus too much on police data. First example, we're going to go back to the 1850s in London. Who here has heard of John Snow and the Broad Street Pump? Have you heard of John Snow and the Broad Street Pump?
I've heard of John Snow and Game of Thrones.
Yes, this is a different John Snow. Yeah, Game of Thrones really messed this one up for me. Okay, so John Snow, real person, 1850s London, had nothing to do with a wall. I think he was a doctor. Yeah, I think he was a doctor. But basically, there was a cholera epidemic going through all of London, and people thought that it was airborne. And he was so convinced that it wasn't airborne, and he really wanted to prove it, or he wanted to understand how it was going from people going to different groups. And what they had was this map here with all these dots on it. And it's not super easy to see from here, but the dots are not like, it's not like an airborne, what you'd expect. It's not like a circle, right? It's a pattern within the city where people are getting affected, people are getting cholera, right? And it's a crisis, it's an epidemic. They're doing all sorts of things to prevent it that aren't solving the problem, and he wants to know why. So he spends time in this neighborhood. He walks the streets. He starts to see the patterns. He notices that whole areas are getting skipped over, and other areas that are like further away. And he realizes that there is a water pump somewhat in the middle of this map. And this is the walking path that people go every day to get their water. Some houses have their own water systems, so they don't go to the well to get this pump to get their water. And after, I don't know how long it took. I think it took him a while to make the case for this, but he was able to prove that there was one infected water pump, and that is how all these people were getting cholera, and that cholera was also something that they could fix with better water treatment, better sewage management, all of these things that really impacted the way London moved forward. All of you who know this story, is there anything I left out that's very crucial? No? Okay.
Just the term miasma.
Oh.
Just the term I use for it in the air of miasma.
Yeah. So that's a good example of how someone was able to take the human context of the data and the points on the map and actually make sense of it in a way that made it usable and affect change for London in the 1850s. And I guess for us too. I guess we're all grateful cholera is under wraps. So more modern example, the New York Times election coverage. So I think the key points here are that what you want to look at when you look at election coverage during the election is like, well, you're going to look at it like 5 times every second. And you want to see what's changed, where it's heading, like what the likely result is based on what you're seeing, and if it's different than what was projected. And then you also want to see if it's been decided. So I thought the New York Times did a great job of showing me those 3 things that I really wanted to know quickly and easily. And the 9th district is still undecided, which I thought was a funny one to pull up here. So a great way to show data, but in a way that is accessible, but doesn't give you information that you don't need, and it gives you the information that you do need super clearly. All right, my last example, and then I'm done. The Stanford Open Policing Project. So I think Eric shared this yesterday, and I hadn't seen it before, but it's a really great example of putting data out there in a way that is really understanding and considerate of the people who are going to use it. So this is their homepage. They've got sections along the top for data, tutorials, findings, publications, and news. And this is all stuff that's built on this common source of data. So if you're coming to this site and you want to browse, you can just browse and see statistics. You can download things. You can see tutorials for how to use it, and you can read publications about things that have been written about it. So when you have an instance like Jon Snow walking around, you're not just seeing points on a map, you're also seeing the story behind it, so you know what to do with it moving forward and how to be considerate with how you're showing that information, which I think is really important. The context of policing data is key for looking at it. So, in conclusion, my husband was like, you have to have a concluding slide. So I put one, I can't remember what it says. So my conclusion is that you should understand your users and what context they're going to be working in. Listen to their goals so that you can make sure what you're building is actually relevant to them and will be impactful for their lives, because if they can't access it and they can't understand it, it won't matter as much as if they can. Check in with them often, make sure they're with you, so that you can deliver data thoughtfully and go on to change the world. That is my inspirational last slide.